All right, this is going to be a fun video. Today we're going to be talking about how many monthly listeners on Spotify is enough. So if you're like me, you're a full-time musician and you're out here on social media sending people to your Spotify account, whether it be your social media followers or your TikTok followers or your YouTube subscribers or your family and friends or even if you have real fans, wouldn't that be great? You're sending them over there. And so much of the time, how many monthly listeners you have on Spotify becomes the number that everybody looks at. Well, there's more to that than meets the eye on who is actually looking at that number, and we'll get into that soon. But this video is all about monthly listeners on Spotify. My name is Kev Rowe. I'm a full-time musician. I've done over 2,000 gigs nationwide. I've released 150 songs on Spotify, and I'm also a playlist curator on Submit Hub. So I have a full life as a musician here on the internet. So yeah, let's talk about who is looking at this monthly listeners number before we determine how many monthly listeners is enough. And spoiler alert, it depends on the artist how many is enough. But let's get deep into who's looking at this number. Mostly the people who are and let's talk about what the monthly listeners number on Spotify actually is worth to you as a musician, because we all know that the streaming royalties at 0.003 cents per stream doesn't support most people's careers' income. So if that's the case, then what's the monthly listeners number worth, or how can you use it to your advantage, right? Who's looking at this number? Mostly the people who look at the monthly listeners number on Spotify and care about it are people within the actual music industry itself. The music business people, which includes you, all your musician friends, all the musicians and bands in your genre, all the booking agents, venue owners, concert venue owners, festival owners, vloggers, record labels, independent record labels, big record labels, the Spotify playlist editors. All of the music industry cares about what this number is. How many monthly listeners you have on Spotify. Everybody's looking at it right now. And in some ways, assuming certain things about you based on that number. Now, we'll get into whether or not those assumptions are correct or not. But on a whole, by looking at that number, people are determining whether or not you are a real artist or not. I haven't said anything about the fans. Well, since we're here, let's talk about them. Music fans and your family and friends and people in the real world don't care how many monthly listeners you have. So we've got two camps here. The music industry itself, music business that I just described, and the rest of the world, which is a lot bigger than the music industry. All these people barely care what your monthly listeners are on Spotify. What do they care about? What does your music do in their life? That's the big question. Do they care if you're having success? Sure. There are some people who look at that number and go, oh, it's up there, he must be pretty good. But in general, it's a transparent exchange. Mostly, they want to know you play music that they like, and can they keep it in their life to actually get that feeling over and over and over again. So these two camps have different motivations, right? So in the music business camp, let's talk about what these people's motivations are. Wow, that's a tough conversation to have because each one of those has different motivations. whether it be a record label just to make money off of your streams and your monthly listeners, or if it's booking agents who want to book your band and hope that a percentage of those monthly listeners come, or if it's other bands who you're playing with want to do a collab with you and help each other grow your monthly listeners. Everybody's got different motivations within the actual music business in how that number is used and manipulated. Yeah, that's a deep conversation there. At the end of this video, I'm going to give you some concrete numbers about how many monthly listeners is enough. I probably should have said that earlier, but anyway, let's get back to the music business. Yeah, this number is like the number everybody's looking at. And does it matter to your fan base? No, they don't really care. They just either love your music or they don't. So, how many monthly listeners is actually enough to the business people? Let's keep our focus on all these business people over here. How many monthly listeners on Spotify is enough depends on a lot of different factors. Your genre, what kind of musician you want to be, and your goals. And let's focus on the goals, because and what kind of life you want to have as an artist. If your goal is to tour the country, be a great live act, maybe you record albums also, but you're following kind of the traditional road as a working, gigging musician who has multiple revenue streams, playing live gigs. Let's say you're doing 100 gigs a year, recording your albums of original material with musicians who you hire and producers who you hire. You own your music, you're living and breathing with it every day, and you just want to get out there. In that case, your monthly listeners is a marketing tool. And you could almost argue it's a marketing tool across the board. But let's keep focused on these touring musicians. How many monthly listeners is enough to use that as a marketing tool to get gigs? And the reason I've started here is because I have a booking agent friend. And in one of our casual conversations, I don't know, a couple months ago, I said to him, well, as a booking agent, how many monthly listeners for an artist impresses you enough to mention it to venue owners so that you can leverage that number to either get into bigger rooms in front of bigger crowds or ask for more money? And he said, I don't know, about 5,000 monthly listeners, I would say. And I was like, really? 5,000 monthly listeners? That's it? And he was like, yeah, I would say that's a big number, and the venue owners would want to hear that. I was like, wow, that's much lower than I thought. And it's probably lower than what you're thinking too, because we live in the digital music marketing space where the numbers get ridiculous, extreme. You know, you're thinking 5,000 monthly listeners is just like the entryway into being an artist. You've got to have 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, 500,000, a million monthly listeners before you're finally arrived as an artist and can tell everyone about it. Not true. Not to booking agents, not to venue owners. 5,000 apparently is enough. Which brings me to the next levels. So let's say 5,000 to 10,000 is enough in the live gigging business. Well, as far as the recording business, let's say you wanted to shift your direction a little more to being a recording artist. And you still want to play some gigs, but you want people investing in you from the recording business to help you make your albums, to partner with you on your streaming royalties and revenues. So you're more of a recording artist. Maybe you're more of a singer-songwriter and you like spending more time in the studio. Maybe you do sync placements, but you're more the recording studio guy. The next bracket, which, and I'm shooting from the hip here, I don't really know the concrete numbers. I'm just trying to help you figure this out. Record labels, I think, come sniffing along once you get over 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 monthly listeners. In the conversations I've had with a lot of my friends who have reached those numbers, or in the research I've done here on YouTube and interviews I've watched, it seems like once you get into the 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 monthly listeners range, the streams start to add up, and the people in the recording business start to go, I think there might be some money to be made here. And they start contacting you. Now, how they contact you, I think, comes in a variety of ways. Probably Instagram DMs, emails, maybe they call you if they can find your number. But somehow they're going to reach out to you, and some people are starting to sniff around. So if that's the case, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. The next level's 500,000 monthly listeners to 1 million monthly listeners. I think that number is the most important when you're dealing with people who have a completely new and different model for the music business, whether it being a social media influencer, a content creator, or a digital producer, where these people don't plan on doing live gigs at all. And maybe they do, but like 5 a year when they get paid 20 grand to show up at some random festival somewhere in Indonesia because they're such a huge content creator or social media influencer. So the emphasis on those people has very little to do with playing live or becoming a good performing artist in person. Now, they still have to be a good performing artist when it comes to being a social media influencer or a content creator or a TikTok dancer. But the revenue streams need to be more about digital revenue. And in that case, having 500,000 to 1 million, 2 million, 3 million monthly listeners becomes a much higher priority because you need that number to leverage with other people who have similar goals, digital goals. So it's not that you won't also, of course, be getting charmed by the traditional music business who might be sending you offers at 100,000, 200,000 monthly listeners. And venues and festival owners, they'll probably all be reaching out to you at those numbers, but it's not your main priority. So a lot of those things you're just going to say no to and just keep working on building your monthly listeners. So there's that. It's what kind of artist are you? The other things to consider are what genres of music do you actually make? So in the Americana music or country music or folk music, those are small genres. And having 5,000, 10,000 monthly listeners looks legit. Like, you're like, wow, you're an Americana artist with 10,000 monthly listeners. You must be really working and you've got it going. And if you have 50,000, even the better. You're like, it's really starting to get up there. If you're a house music producer or a rapper or even a country artist, the bigger the genre, unfortunately, the bigger the numbers that you need to have in terms of monthly listeners for them to mean something. So genre definitely is a factor in how many monthly listeners is enough for you as an artist. But those are the two things that I would consider the most. What kind of career do you have? Like, where do you want to spend your time as an artist, either on the road or in the studio or out in the street making social media content? That would be the one thing to consider. And the other thing to consider would be, what genre of music are you making? And knowing how competitive the monthly listeners numbers are on that. All that being said, I still believe monthly listeners is the most overblown, overrated, overvalued number in the music business, possibly at this time. There are so many other metrics that we need to pay attention to that show consistent growth over time. Like, you want a long, nice, smooth growth curve. You don't want big peaks and valleys, and monthly listeners has a way of shooting up and then shooting back down. So would I pay too much attention to it? I would pay attention to the number because it matters. But maybe, I don't know, 5 to 10% compared to all the other numbers that you need to be looking at. Having consistent followers on all your other social media platforms, having a deep funnel in terms of merchandise sales, having an email list, maybe a texting list, and playing live gigs. So do you have a website with a whole bunch of dates on them? Yeah, let's make the number of yearly gigs the new metric of significance versus monthly listeners on Spotify. How about that for an idea? Anyway, monthly listeners, it's fun to watch. Don't get too wrapped up into it. I hope you like this video. Talk to you later. Bye.